Have you been missing thinking about the modern pentathlon? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. Little question of honesty right now. By show of hands, you three, how many of you were aware that 2 weeks from now, had we been living in a normal world, the Olympics would be starting?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Have you been keeping up on it? I mean, have you been missing it, Rick? Is this something that has been front of mind that you've been saying, man, I can't believe the Olympics are not coming? Or has it kind of been an on and off thing that pops up once in a while?
Well, I knew they were going to be on this summer, but I didn't know the exact date. And no, I don't miss it, to be honest. I mean, when it's here, I love watching it. I think most Canadians would agree. Most people around the world tune in to see, the greatest stars of our time right now, to see how they're doing. But no, it's not on the watching calendar on the TV or the tablet or whatever. Not to the same degree that NHL hockey or the NFL or the CFL would be.
Bubba, maybe I missed your hand, and I'm not going to embarrass you, but I didn't see the hand up. I didn't know either, to be honest. I knew, like Rick, it was this summer. I hadn't realized now when it was going to be. It kind of slipped out of mind. Why? Why is it that this is a huge event that we look forward to? How could we not be thinking about it?
There was so much talk about it on a daily basis, I believe, on the buildup of will it happen or will it not happen? And it was basically front page news of the sports sections, whether this was going to happen or not. Would it get pushed back? Would it get totally canceled? And I think it was in the forefront, but I think once they said they were going to put it off to 2022 or 2021, and still call it the 2020 games, that it kind of disappeared for me. So when you actually reminded me there, you caught me off guard. I have to say it, Scott. I forgot. I have to admit.
Steve?
Well, it's not front of mind, Scott. I mean, I'm always aware of it because I always try to get there, and most of the time I don't. So I'm always aware it's around the end, the last couple of weeks in July. Just depending on where it is. For weather, sometimes they move by 2 or 3 weeks. But like the other guys said, because it was formally canceled, it wasn't like maybe we'll have it. Then the timing doesn't really come up. I do think about the Olympics a lot because I miss certain events. I can't say the modern pentathlon is one of them, but I'm always really big on the track and field, and particularly the relays and the hard sprints and the 1500. So. I'm not mourning it. It's not front of mind. It's not even back of mind because we're now even wondering if it's going to be next year. I have to say I did think about it yesterday because I ran into Miles Meisner Daly's dad, and potentially that's the Hamilton outlier. At 19 years old, could have been in the Olympics on the 4x400 team.
I tell you why I asked the question is because first of all, if we were to get to the beginning, and when we got to the beginning of baseball season, I think everyone suddenly started thinking, man, baseball is not being played. It was there. And if hockey season rolls into September, and depending on what happens, we're not seeing hockey, I think we will be aware of that. But that leads me to the second point. And Rick, I go to this. This, to me, seems like it is the perfect illustration of why so many Olympic athletes have such a hard time getting funding and everything else. If it's not in front of our face on the TV, we don't think of it. And that's sad, but that's reality, it seems.
100% true. I mean, the Olympic Games come every 2 years, bouncing from summer to winter, and those athletes are really out of sight, out of mind for most of their athletic existence in terms of us being fans or in terms of sponsors shelling out dollars to support those athletes. But at the end of the day, unless they're on a World Championships that's on TV or a national championship event that's on TV or the Olympics, we tend to not think about those athletes unless they also play in a club team aspect. NHL hockey players would be the perfect example. They play for the Maple Leafs or the LA Kings or the Florida Panthers, whatever the case is. We see them for most nights out of the fall and the winter and the spring, but we also get to see them every 4 years at the Winter Olympic Games. If you're a trampoline artist, we see them once every 4 years, and that's unfortunate, I think, for us as fans because they're very talented, but certainly unfortunate for those athletes as well.
Bubba, that makes it hard. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead, Bubba.
I beg to I wonder, and I'm wondering, and I'll challenge all of you guys here on this. This is a Summer Olympics, and we're in Canada. And we have done better in the summer games, but I would wonder if this was the winter games. If we were talking, the winter games right now in the winter, would we maybe remember this more so because we've akin to more successful winter games in the last couple of games, and of course with the National Hockey League, I guess seemingly looking like they're going to be playing this year. I wonder if we would be saying the same thing if this was the winter games and not the summer games.
I think you're exactly right on that, and I think what Radley's point is also very strong is that it does show that athletes are have a little trouble, even winter athletes, and partly because we've had so much success there. So it's a little tough for somebody who won a gold medal in a lesser winter sport because we've had so many gold medals over the last 2 or 3 Winter Olympics. But this was the time for Canada's Olympic team this year to sustain momentum from Winter Olympics, and it started in Vancouver in 2010, and athletes from the Summer Games have benefited partly from what happened in the Winter Games, but more by the attitude that we have now as Canadian. I don't want to use the word nationalists, and I'll use that in small letters, not capital letters, that generated from the 2010 games where we were much more supportive and aware of our athletes. Now it's always tricky, as you say, in the summertime. Now we've lost that. At least those athletes have lost that because now it's 3 years removed from the last Winter Olympics, and there's always a carryover effect. It's one of the nice things of the every 2 years instead of every 4 years. You're not competing in the same year.
I'll throw out another thing, and this is not for you guys. This is for people watching. Take a few seconds, hit pause for a moment here. Give yourself 10 or 20 seconds and try and think of how many athletes that you can name that were going to be in this Summer Olympics from Canada off the top of your head. And I bet you that for most people, the number is certainly less than 5, maybe less than 2. And to me, again, that goes to the issue here. It's not about, it could be lack of coverage, I suppose, although as Rick points out, unless you're competing somewhere, you just sort of get lost in the weeds and the world carries on. And then when the Olympics show up, you emerge and we love watching you. And we all become experts on the modern pentathlon or on, whatever event it is that we would never otherwise watch. But until then, it is really hard to keep up. And that's truly unfortunate to the athletes. I don't know how you get around that, though.
But again, is that a reflection of, that I'll go back to the Summer Games. I mean, we don't seem to show a tremendous, other than I say Andre DeGrasse, who competes in that sprint.
And that's a name that everybody would have named, I think.
Everyone would have probably connected. That's 100% name almost. But again, we just don't seem to cover javelin throwing. We don't seem to, even to Adam Van Koeverden's and his success, we don't seem to really watch the world. Every year there's the World Cup, not the World Cup, but the World Series of that sport of rowing that just goes on. We don't seem to cover it as we would maybe figure skating, which it gets a lot of love on an every year basis.
Okay, but hold on, Bubba, 1 second. Let me jump in for 1 second to your point, because I don't disagree with some of what you're saying, but eliminating the hockey teams, men and women. Now, if I asked the same question and said, hit pause again and tell me in 2 years from now, name 5 Winter Olympians outside of hockey, you think people would be able to do that easier? I'm not sure.
Sure,
I think they can do figure skating for sure.
Skating, curling.
Okay, curling. But those are
bobsled.
Figure skating, hockey, and curling. What'd you say, Rick?
I said maybe bobsled.
Well, it depends if there's some locals or if there's some former football players who have name brand, name recognition.
Skiing.
I think it goes back to the success. I mean, if they've won multiple medals, look at our figure skaters. They always seem to be on the podium, whether it's World Championships or Olympics. So those names every 4 years are there again, and their longevity speaks volumes to their talent as well. But I think it also goes back to 2 things. Number one, us as kids growing up in the school system or even recreationally outside of school, we tend to participate in more team sports. So I think we follow more team sports. And the Olympics, yes, there's some teams involved here and there with the different events, but more often than not, it's a single or individual style sport, whether it's shot put or javelin, figure skating in some cases if it's not pairs. But we tend, as North Americans, I think, follow more team sports, whether it's hockey, soccer, baseball, you name it. And the Olympics is a little more individualistic.
And the other, most of the team sports professional sports, right? So there's the marketing money behind them and all of that kind of thing there. And that's been North America. It's been more of a professional sport thing. And one of the things that killed the Olympic movement, because the centerpiece, the two centerpieces of the Summer Olympics are swimming and track and field. Why? Because they are ancient. In a way, and they're more accessible to everybody. Everybody can run. You don't need anybody around the world can run. Anybody around the world can swim if you have a coastline or a lake. So those are why those are very, very popular. But in track and field, when the indoor season the indoor track and field, which was really, really big through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, and you could see with the Hamilton Spectator indoor games, which were massive, but they were among the only ones left by the mid to late 90s. And once those things started to go, you lost that regularity that we're all talking about here, that Scott's been talking about. And that made some big names out of a lot of people. It also hurt that in the mile and the pole vault, which were the big things in track and field from the indoor sense, because they were the best to watch indoors in an arena. One was up in the rafters. The other kept a guy on the track or a woman on the track for about 11 times around. North Americans, particularly Americans, lost their dominance in that. And so the interest went away. And I think that's had a real spillover to the Summer Games.
Whatever happened to Sergei Bubka anyway?
Yeah, right. There you go. You could probably name 5 pole vaulters from the 70s.
And I understand that the Olympics, the beauty of the Olympics in some ways is the stories that it generates. And so we can all do a better job naming past Olympians than former Olympians, or than future Olympians, pardon me. We could all name a ton of people who have done well. And maybe that's just reality, that the Olympics are one of those things that are a great thing to look back on almost.
Can I make one other thing here, is that maybe we're not looking at stars developing more in the Summer Games now. Finally, the Summer Games have gone where the Winter Games have started to go, and that's adopting X Games types of sports. And the stars there tend to be the sports and maybe one or two of the top people, but it's the sport itself because it's so visual and all of those things with the biking, the types of biking they use. But the more Summer Games got into that, I think you would have seen a little more of that, because it's a next generation and a generation of that type of sport.
But it's strange, though, the modernization of the Olympics with those sports. Gotta say, maybe I'm getting to be an old man. I'm not a fan.
I am.
I mean, I respect that there's an X Games, and I'll sit down and watch those events when the X Games are going off. But I've always been a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to especially the Summer Olympics. I'm into the track, and when it's actually happening, I enjoy watching the cycling. And I admit it, I'll do it once every two or 4 years. The World Championships outside of track, I mean, those are the events that I like. But I'm not running to the TV for the 4x4 bike off mountain bike jumping.
Yeah, I will say this, as Canadians, I think, amongst the new Olympic events, I think I like more the winter stuff.
Yes.
The ski cross, the snowboarding events, those are not only visually appealing, but those athletes are obviously tremendous in some of the things that they can do. And I find that much more exciting than maybe something with a bicycle, maybe something with, whitewater rafting or skateboarding, even though some of the elements are the same. But the winter stuff always seems to be more fun.
Well, one of the reasons the X Games stuff in the winters is more fun is because it's very much like what say if the 4 of us were doing, or even our children or our grandchildren were doing. We wouldn't say, if we were at the rink, for instance, we wouldn't go long track skating, say, okay, you go and then I'll go and we'll time and see who's first. We'll say first around the rink, and that's short track, right?
I would just like to see.
We wouldn't time it. We would say all 4 of us will race to that tree.
Yeah.
I'd just like to see the Summer Games not go with new events, bring back some old events. Tug of war, water swimming, live pigeon shooting. Actually, that one probably wouldn't go so well these days. Wait, are you missing the Olympics right now? And if you are missing the Olympics, or you're thinking about the Olympics, first of all, do a little test like we asked you to. Down below in the comments, can you name 5 Canadians who would have been in the Summer Olympics? I'd love to see that test. Our Twitter handles are on the screen. You can comment below. We would love to have you subscribe as well. You can do it right down there. Thanks for watching. We'll talk Olympics again soon.